Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, and good evening to our fellow participants on this platform. You know, each week when this program comes on, I thank our Creator that we are still alive and that the world is still alive out there, while I feel sadness for the loss of lives anywhere in the world where there are, violence and wars and tribulations that are going on. But I'm happy we are all here, and I hope we will continue to be here.
Yes, 2 points to what you just said there. I think it's alarming that WHO has put the death toll from COVID at 15 million instead of the numbers that were originally reported. So I think you are very right, sir. And I can see some of our viewers are already saying, good afternoon, good evening to you, Prof. Thank you all for joining. As usual, please share the link. Let people know that the Prof is back here. And sir, we are going very close to 100 episodes of almost every week. Big milestone. Very big milestone. Well done, sir. Someone here is saying, we thank God for our lives, Prof. So I think that people are echoing your sentiment of being grateful for where we are at this point in time. Sir, there are quite a few points to cover today, again, as usual, going across different countries, excuse me, of the world. But we'll start off with some interesting developments from Russia. And that's the first one I'd like to start with, sir, is the news about the comments by the foreign minister of Russia, where he referred to Hitler as having Jewish origins. And I can see behind you that you do have a book about Adolf Hitler behind you. Right there, sir. But surprisingly, this evening, there's been the report that Putin has called the Israeli prime minister to apologize for that comment. How significant is that?
Well, first of all, the book about Hitler behind me. I have books about a lot of world leaders, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's the job of a scholar to make sure that he stays informed. Reading a book on anybody is not an indication of my own personal feeling about their contribution towards the world. I will read a book on slavery. Who started slavery? The kinds of ships, the position of American presidents on slavery. Just as I will read a book on Abraham Lincoln, who still, I suppose, between him and Kennedy, I don't know who will be my favorite, American president. So I books energize my brain. And so that settles that. The comment that the Russian foreign minister was in bad taste, very bad taste. However, he probably was copying Putin himself, who, in order to demonize Ukraine, kept saying that they were going into Ukraine to remove the Nazis who were operating there, even though he was aware that the president of Ukraine is Jewish. And there are a lot of citizens of Jewish blood in Ukraine. So Putin started it, and he thought he will win some credits by doing this. Now his foreign minister carried it one step further. It's a sore point. It's a sore point with Israel, this whole question about Adolf Hitler. It's a sore point with Israel about the Holocaust. Now, it's not just the Israelis who feel this. I mean, a lot of Europeans, including Russians themselves, paid a heavy price in confronting Hitler. So to have brought Hitler into this murky affair, which is what is going on between Russia and Ukraine, was in poor taste, very bad taste, and it has backfired. So to that extent, I'm not surprised that Putin will put a call through to Israel to apologize. Because if Israel decides to throw its weight behind Ukraine in terms of supporting them with weapons and with technical assistance in weaponry, believe me, Russia will be in deep, deep trouble. So, from the point of view of national and strategic interests, I can understand why he will put in that call. Damage control, to make sure that Israel does not start to react in a way that will threaten Russia.
But sir, for the lay person looking at this, we've not had Putin apologize to any other country. Well, this is the first time I'm hearing that Putin apologized to anyone about anything, let alone the kind of issue that was raised in this point. What about Israel, other than military capability? What about Israel would make Putin do what he did, sir?
I gave you one. The second is that in Russia, there are a lot of Jewish citizens and who are making enormous contribution to the development of Russia in the scientific field, in all kinds of fields. And the last thing you want to do is to make them, I'm talking about Russians of Jewish blood, to make them start having this feeling of they are not being appreciated even their lives being put in danger because of what the foreign minister said. There are a lot of Jewish military officers in the Russian army who, again, you want to be sure of their absolute loyalty, rather than make them feel that actually, if you have Jewish blood, you are not really accepted as being fully Russian or that kind of thing. You know, one of the things which, although he never said so, and there's no evidence that he ever averted his mind to it, but I'm sure one of the things that Hitler probably regretted in his life was being so anti-Jewish that a lot of Jewish scientists, took refuge in the West, the United States, Britain. One of the most prominent being Einstein, whose equation was responsible for the rocket, the enormous progress that the United States made in terms of rocketry, and also in terms of, again, weapons development. If Hitler had not been anti-Jewish, if he had just focused his program on energizing and innovating German resources, I doubt whether you have any country in the world who would have defeated Germany during the Second World War. But because he showed that he was anti-Jewish, and he didn't want to have anything with them, to do with them, the Americans and the British were just eager to get their hands on Jewish scientists, who then assisted in the American and the British military ways in coping and in defeating Germany under Hitler. So in a way, it's, look, I don't think it will take us, I don't know, years if we were to start discussing what I will call the Jewish psychic in international relations. Why nations, and not just Western nations, but several nations in general, behind their thoughts is this sense of guilt about what happened to Jews during the Second World War. There are a lot of nations in the world who will not vote against Israel in the United Nations, simply out of a sense of guilt about what happened, to the Jews during the Second World War. So in a way, I think it's one of the smartest things that Putin has done in his life to put through that call to Bennett to apologize for their remark by his foreign minister.
So May 9 is round the corner. There's been quite a lot of speculation that Putin is going to call for an all-out war against Ukraine. Now, I don't know what we're seeing, what that is like, if this is not a war already, but people are talking about an all-out war would most likely be declared as Russia celebrates victory during World War II. I guess it would be bittersweet for them because they haven't really won this existing war that's going on. What is your view on the likely approach Putin would take on the 9th of May?
I have no idea. But as you rightly indicated in your promo, what more could he do to Ukraine? He's leveled their cities. He's destroyed their infrastructural institutions. He's driven how many million Ukrainians into exile. So what more? What more damage could he do to Ukraine that he isn't doing? My own information, when I say my information, I'm sure a lot of people in the world already know this. However, is that I understand not only the Americans, but that even the Chinese have told Putin there is a red line using nuclear or bacteriological weapons in Ukraine, that is a no-go area. And I hope that the message has got across to him, both from the West and from his ally in the East. So I don't know what else he could do on May 9th. You know, when you said May 9th, I thought you were going to talk about presidential aspirants in Nigeria, you know, throwing their hat into the ring. I mean, I thought that's what you were going to talk about. I didn't know you were going to talk about Russian Second World War anniversary. I have no idea of what is behind his mind.
I can go there if you want me to, Prof.
As an observer.
I can go there, but anyway. Someone on YouTube here is saying that I think Russian foreign minister and president consciously acted as a matter of war strategy, is what this person is saying, in terms of how they dealt with this comment about Israel. But I do think that it's significant, like you have said, that Putin apologized, which he's not known to do that, at least not publicly, as he has done in this case. So let me go to, there's another important point on Russia that I want to raise, and then we'll go to Africa. I know we want to talk about developments in Africa as well and other parts of the world. One key point, sir, the involvement of the Pope and the visit of the Pope. And maybe we'll talk about the Pope a little bit and the role he has taken. What is your view of his visit and some of the comments that he made during his visit? And surprisingly, being critical.
His visit to where?
Sir, there was a visit by the Pope to Russia.
I see.
Yeah.
That escaped me. I wasn't aware of that.
Okay, let's deal with the point, sir, about the comments the Pope made about the leader of the Orthodox Church in Russia, about him not being a Putin altar boy. That's the key point I want to talk about, sir, because it's unusual for the Pope to be that critical of another leader in that sense. What is your view on that, sir?
I think the last thing you want us to get into is the relationship between the Western part of the church and the Eastern Orthodox part of the church. Because the two were together, one unit, until they break up. And the Pope, the Pope is still recognized. Let's get that straight. The Pope is still recognized, probably not even as the first among equals, but as number one among Christian leaders. Forget what Henry VIII did in removing, the Anglican Church from the Catholic Church. I think by and large, gradually the Anglican Church has come to accept that the Pope is the head of the Christian Church. And I know also that in the meetings that are taking place between the Pope and the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Russian, the head of the Russian church is not the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's not the head. The head is actually, if you like, they call him the Eastern Pope, to distinguish from the Western Pope. I think he's based in Istanbul, in Turkey. That is the head of the church, of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And there have been moves actually also. Yes.
Sorry, so someone just called to my attention that it was not a visit, it was a Zoom meeting where the Pope was interviewed and he made the comments. So you are right, sir.
I don't think one would have missed it. It would have been an earth-shaking, visit if the Pope had gone there. And so to that extent, I can now understand the Pope reprimanding the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, because two popes have been noted for having abrasive tongues. Pope John Paul II or the first?
I think it was the
at least Pope John Paul II, the Polish Pope.
Yes.
He had an abrasive tongue, in his head when it comes to reprimanding people. And this Pope had also been known to have a short temper. Let me put it that way. So, I am not surprised that he would go that far to say so. He would not be the first one who would point attention to the fact that the head of the Russian Orthodox Church has been more Russian than being a religious leader. His nationality seems to have gotten the better of him. But at the same time, if you were in Russia having to deal with Putin, I think you will need to be careful about, asserting your autonomy. Because don't forget what that church suffered under the communists. It is since perestroika that actually the church has been coming into its own. And most of the leadership of the Russian church, even now, were people who served under the communist regimes, and therefore we are not used to asserting any autonomy, but no, it's the head of the Russian church is caught in the middle, and he needs to be careful. It's okay for the Pope in the safety of Rome. Look, Putin has no qualms about killing people. His opponents, he has no qualms about doing that. It's a retired KGB officer. So, and every Russian knows that. So I think that one needs to show some form of recognition of the delicate position of the head of the Russian church.
Before I leave the Pope, sir, one quick question. This time around, he and the Japanese Prime Minister met. And one of the comments that came out of the meeting, one of the discussion points, was the hope for a nuclear-free world. Given your view, sir, about Ukraine and the fact that if Ukraine still had nuclear capability, you doubted whether or not they would be going through what they're going now. Is there the possibility of having a nuclear-free world anytime soon?
Not at all. And it will not be wise to do so. Probably all scholars now agree that what has kept us from the Third World War, especially between Russia and the United States, has been the fact that both possess nuclear weapons and both know that they could both wipe themselves out the surface of the earth if they went into a war. And therefore, the possession of nuclear weapons has served as a deterrent to both of them. And I'm sure that even in the relationship between the United States and China, possession of nuclear weapons by both will also serve as a deterrent. Why do you think that countries, Iran, North Korea, Israel, Pakistan, India, all rushed, and I'm sure there are one or two that have never accepted that they have nuclear weapons, but they probably do. Why do you think people rush into having nuclear weapons? One is to protect themselves. The second is actually, since their opponents know that they have it, and they know that their opponents have it, is to serve as a deterrent to even their own people pushing their government into taking reckless actions when it comes to disputes. The worst thing that can happen to a government is for you to have a boundary dispute with your neighbor. And because you don't have nuclear weapons and your neighbor doesn't have nuclear weapons, then you are prepared to throw in infantry, throw in tanks, throw in airplanes, and you'll be urged on by your citizens. And you don't want to be accused of being a coward, backing down. Whereas if both sides know that they have nuclear weapons, even your own people will probably be telling you to take it easy. They don't want to be wiped out in a nuclear conflagration. So to that extent, I don't wish for a nuclear-free world. It's not going to serve the purpose of freedom or peace.
Thank you for that, sir. There is a question here someone has just put through to me, and this is taking us back to Russia, sir. And what this person is questioning is the proposed embargo on importing Russian oil by the EU, and the fact that a number of countries, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Hungary, are saying they will be looking to take advantage of any exemptions to that embargo if it goes ahead. What is your take there, sir? Are we starting to see a division within the EU in terms of response to what's happening in Russia?
No, I wouldn't think so. When confronted with a situation such as this, there are ways and means of going around it, such that the solidity of the alliance is maintained. One is to find excess crude somewhere that can fill in the gap. There are members of OPEC who are not even producing their quota. Nigeria is one of them, although that's because of security issues or security factors. But then, if the push comes to shove, those security factors, the Western countries could assist in dealing with them. Also, you need pipes to facilitate the flow of oil between two countries. Things could happen to those pipes that if you read Confessions of an Economic Hitman, you will know what I am talking about. If those pipes are not there, then the question of oil flowing will not arise. There'll be accidents. Accidents do happen. So even oil pipes.
Thank you for that, sir. Let me go to a point we addressed briefly last week when you talked about the UN Secretary General and the timing of his trip to Ukraine and Russia. Now, one of the things the Secretary General said was that the UN Security Council had failed in its duties to try to stop the war from happening in the first place, or to mitigate the prolonged nature of this war. What could the UN Security Council have done to stop this? And secondly, is this the Secretary General being critical of what we could say is his own organization?
I suspect the comments of the Secretary General have been taken out of context. Yes, it is true that the Security Council did not prevent the war from breaking out. The Security Council did not stop the war once it broke out. But then that's a different thing from saying the Security Council could not stop the war from breaking out, as if the Security Council could have done that. There's no way the Security Council could, in a dispute that involves a superpower, a nuclear superpower, there's no way the Security Council could exercise any power unless with the connivance or with the support of that superpower. Did the Security Council stop the war in Iraq, the American invasion of Iraq? No, it couldn't. Did they stop Britain from, Tony Blair, from joining in that invasion of Iraq? No, because it couldn't. It involved two superpowers. So to that extent, the Security Council could not have stopped Russia. And that is why these superpowers were given the power of the veto to prevent a situation where the United Nations, that has no troops of its own, get that clear, will then be engaged in a military confrontation with a superpower. If a superpower is intent on using its military force in a particular situation, there's nothing that the United Nations could have done about it. Now, I've heard even the Ukrainian president had been critical of the UN, but he has to understand that the UN will only interpose itself where the superpowers agree that the UN should interpose itself. So what I'm saying is, it's not even where the superpower is involved. Where a client of a superpower is involved, the United Nations will be rendered impotent. And it was deliberately designed that way so that the UN itself does not get itself into a war situation with a client of a superpower or the superpower itself. So the words used by the Secretary General, I think, were taken out of context. Yes, he regrets the situation we are in, but I'm sure he will be the last one to think that it was a dereliction of duty on its own part as Secretary General, or a dereliction of duty collectively by the Security Council for not stopping the war from breaking out, or once it has broken out, for not even stopping it, even right now. How many divisions does the United Nations have? How many airplanes does the United Nations have? How many nuclear weapons does the United Nations have? Nothing. Therefore, it cannot control a superpower. We wish it could, but the moral authority is there. And the UN has used that moral authority to the hilt. On this occasion, many resolutions passed by the United Nations General Assembly under the Uniting for Peace authority, because the Security Council also could not pass that resolutions. They would have been vetoed by either the Russians or the Chinese. When the United Nations, when the Security Council cannot act because of this veto power under the Uniting for Peace resolution, the General Assembly of the UN can then act. But when we say act, one does not mean it can authorize the UN to put troops in the field. It can pass resolutions condemning what even a superpower is doing. As we have found out in the case of Ukraine, the superpower doesn't have to listen. And I'm not again blaming the Russians alone. The United States have been in position where it has also ignored resolutions of the United Nations. And one of those is, lifting sanctions on Cuba. So many of those resolutions have been passed by the United Nations General Assembly, and the Americans have simply ignored them. So I don't think the Secretary General was condemning himself or condemning his own organization. He could, but that's the way it is structured. And believe me, if it were not structured that way, it will have to be structured that way. So all this talk about maybe having a new alternative to the United Nations, that is all there is, just talk. Because unless the Americans will then be prepared to put their troops at the disposal of this alternative to fight Russia, but you've got your answer. In Ukraine, Biden says American troops will not be on the ground to fight Russia. He says so from the very beginning. So what else can the United Nations do?
So someone is asking on YouTube here, what would be your take on the UN Secretary General's visit to Maiduguri in Nigeria?
Don't let us localize that visit. With your permission and with the permission of whoever has that question, I would like to broaden it, because the Secretary General went to two French-speaking African countries before coming to Nigeria. And he spoke about the security situations there. He spoke about the lack of development there. But the UN Secretary General has never spoken about what we have spoken about on this program, the colonial pact by which France has held down its former French colonies. He should have asked, where is Mali's economic resources? Who's been, for the past 60 years, who has been in charge of exploiting Mali's economic resources? Where are Mali's central reserves? Where are they? Are they in the Central Bank of Mali, or are they in the Central Bank in Paris? Which currency does Mali use, and who controls this currency? Which currency does Burkina Faso use? Who controls this currency? Whose currency does Chad use, and who controls this currency? He has never spoken about French control over these territories. And is it really surprising? Is it a coincidence that when Mali then said, France, please get out. You've been here for 60 years. You have not solved these security problems for us. You can't. And since then, issues have been coming out, news have been coming out about Malian forces committing atrocity, one atrocity or the other. I find that coincidence just a bit too clever. So I believe the Secretary General should address his mind. This is not a question of a scholar, crying wolf where there isn't. It is there, what is called the colonial pact is there in black and white. Let the Secretary General address that. Let him tell France to take his economic weight off the neck of these former French-speaking territories. Specifically, his trip to Nigeria, since he's come that far, and you have problems of IDPs, internally displaced people in Nigeria, I think it will have been, he would have opened himself to criticism if he had refused or if he had omitted Nigeria from his itinerary. Don't forget that his deputy in New York is a Nigerian, Amina Mohammed. She would have briefed him about the internal security situation in Nigeria. If he had just gone to Abuja and then flown out, again, people would have criticized him that you didn't really go to the theater of war. You really didn't go to where people are suffering. So he's gone there. I have no objection. I think that, basically he's done the right thing. Whether he said the right things once he then got there, that's another kettle of fish.
So someone has called out another question that I will put through to you, sir. This one wants to hear your views on Sweden announcing that they had received US security assurance if they put in an application to join NATO. Is that assurance sufficient enough for Sweden to want to actually go ahead with joining NATO by putting that application in?
I'm sorry. The Swedish Prime Minister and the Finnish Prime Minister are really in a very tough bind. They are damned if they do, they are damned if they don't. And I think that the security assurance which the United States will have given both countries is that if you join NATO, then you come under the protection of Article 5 of the NATO Charter, which means an attack on you will be an attack on the United States itself and all members of NATO. The question, the issue that should agitate our mind is, what happens in the interregnum between putting in your application and you being accepted as a member? What happens? Will you find yourself in a Ukraine-like situation where really America cannot put troops on the ground to help you because you are not a member yet, but you are just on your way to being a member. What kind, does that guarantee cover that interregnum or not? I suspect that it does. That they haven't seen what's happened in Ukraine. The moment you put in that application, you are a pseudo member, a proto member, or whatever that language name one can apply to that interregnum. But there are a lot of them who are caught in that middle. Moldova is another one. And things are happening in the border between Ukraine, Moldova, and Russia. That is there. So I think there are actually 3 countries who are caught in the bind between what Moscow may do and what the Americans may do. But you know, what I mean, for the sake of my colleagues, scholars on our platform, and maybe we will deal with this another time. Does this mean the death of neutrality in international affairs? Because now Sweden, a pillar of neutrality, has said it is going to join NATO. Switzerland hasn't said it to join NATO, but it has adopted the sanctions against Moscow. There goes neutrality. That will be the first time since the end of the Second World War, I believe, that Switzerland will actually take a position either for or against on any international issue. That was pristine agent of neutrality, Switzerland, and yet. So does this mark the end of neutrality in international affairs? Does it?
So I think I've got enough time to throw one more question in here. And this one relates to the United Kingdom and the fact that local elections took place today. And what is your perception, sir, of how the British Prime Minister has performed and how you think the British people will perceive him, bearing in mind the very active role he's played with Ukraine and what's going on in Ukraine, but he's got his own domestic challenges. How do you think the voters will perceive him, and what impact is his some of the issues surrounding him? What impact is that going to have on him?
Well, you know, this issue came up when we were discussing Macron and the French election. And I was confident that the French, that Macron's role on Ukraine and his the positive attitude that he has exhibited will play in his favor and will tend to overrun or overcome his domestic problems. And I was proved right. He didn't scrape in. He actually won massively, 58 point something percent. That to me is not a victory that should be sniffed at. I think there are a lot of presidents in the world who actually will give themselves a gold cup if they won an election with that kind of a percentage. In the case of Britain, you are quite right that Boris Johnson has put on a Churchillian poster on Ukraine, including even borrowing Churchill's words that for Ukraine, this will be your finest hour. He probably ought to have given credit to Churchill for using that term. He and his foreign minister have taken quite strong positions on the need to confront Putin. Would that be enough to overcome his Partygate? Would that be enough to overcome the perception of him as a dubious character? He will pardon me for saying this. He probably is not listening to us anyway. But one thing surprised me. A couple of weeks ago, the BBC interviewed a middle-aged lady and her husband, probably in their late 50s, about something that Boris Johnson had done. And she said, well, these days, these politicians, what can you expect? And I found that educative. They don't expect much of politicians anymore. And if you are not expecting much, then you don't get disappointed. So to that extent, this is a total condemnation of politicians, not just Boris Johnson. But to think that I will hear this from a British electorate, a British voter, who normally, will have very strong views on the values of their prime minister and his ministers. But it was like, well, what can we do? What can we expect? So really, I don't know where the judgment will come down on these local elections. But in another 2-3 hours or so, we should know the polls have closed. So they are in the process of counting. Unlike the French one, where within 3 minutes of the polls closing, they told you what the result was going to be, and they were right. I'm not sure that happens because of the nature of the first past the post system that is used in Britain, both for local government elections and parliamentary elections. But I would be surprised if the Conservatives don't take a beating. I would be surprised.
Well, a lot of elections around the corner, heating up in some other countries of the world that we know about as people start to join. I will not ask questions about that because we've run out of time now.
Oh,
so we'll leave that to another day.
Saved by the bell.
Saved by the bell, yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. And thank you to our viewers for joining. Thank you for the questions I saw there. And we will be back again next week. Thank you very much, sir.
Wakanda.
Good night, sir.
Good night.